The bitter wind swept across the Montana plains like a vengeful spirit, carrying with it the cries of 10-year-old Zara Kinnell as she huddled against the base of a gnarled cottonwood tree, her tiny frame shivering in the merciless December cold of 1878. Frank Garrison pulled his chestnut mare to an abrupt halt, the animal's breath forming ghostly plumes in the frigid air. The 25-year-old cowboy had been tracking a stray calf from his employer's ranch when the unmistakable sound of a child's weeping carried to him on the wind. Following the heartbreaking sound, he dismounted cautiously, approaching the hunched figure with gentle steps. "Hello there," he called softly, not wanting to frighten the child further. "Are you hurt, little one?" The girl's head snapped up, revealing a dirt-smudged face streaked with tears. Her dark hair hung in tangled disarray around hollow cheeks, and her eyes, a startling shade of amber, were wide with fear. She couldn't have been more than 10, Frank estimated, and she was dangerously underdressed for the bitter cold in only a threadbare dress and a shawl that had seen far better days. "Don't be afraid," Frank continued, removing his heavy sheepskin coat. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Frank. Frank Garrison. I work at the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles east of here." He approached slowly, like he would a spooked horse, and draped his coat around her trembling shoulders. "This should warm you up a bit." The girl clutched the coat around herself, the oversized garment swallowing her small frame. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. "What's your name?" Frank asked, crouching down to her level. "And what in tarnation are you doing out here all alone?" "It's freezing and there's a storm coming." "Zara," she said softly. "Zara Kinnell. My ma died of the fever 2 days ago. The landlord threw me out, said I couldn't stay without rent money." Frank's jaw tightened with anger. "You've been out here for 2 days, in this cold." He glanced at the small bundle beside her, clearly all her worldly possessions. "Where's your pa?" "Don't have one. Ma said he left before I was born." Frank ran a gloved hand through his sandy hair, his conscience already made up before he even considered the implications. "Well, Miss Zara Kinnell, you can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death before morning. I'm taking you back to the ranch. Mrs. Holloway, our cook, will fix you up something warm to eat and we'll figure things out from there." The girl's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" Frank smiled gently. "Because it's the right thing to do, and my ma raised me better than to leave a child alone in the cold." He stood and extended his hand. "Come on now, Daisy here is a gentle mare. She'll carry us both back to the ranch." Hesitantly, Zara took his hand, allowing herself to be guided to the horse. Frank lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her, making sure she was secure in front of him, still wrapped in his coat. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. "Double Creek isn't far, and Mrs. Holloway makes the best stew this side of the Mississippi." As they rode through the gathering dusk, Frank felt the child gradually relax against him, her small body soaking up his warmth. A protective instinct surged through him, one he hadn't known himself capable of feeling. "It'll be all right," he murmured, more to himself than to Zara. "I promise." The Double Creek Ranch sat nestled in a valley, protected from the worst of the wind by a ridge of pine-covered hills. Light glowed from the windows of the main house and bunkhouse as Frank guided Daisy into the yard. Several of the ranch hands looked up in surprise as he rode in with a child. "Garrison, what you got there?" called Hank Murphy, the oldest of the cowhands. "Found her out by Cottonwood Creek," Frank replied, dismounting before gently lifting Zara down. "She's alone. Her ma passed 2 days ago." Mrs. Holloway, the stout, gray-haired cook, emerged from the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of the shivering child. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed, hurrying forward. "Bring her inside this instant." Within minutes, Zara was seated at the kitchen table, a bowl of steaming stew before her and a cup of hot chocolate warming her hands. Frank explained the situation to Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Pearson, the ranch foreman, while the girl ate ravenously. "The poor lamb," Mrs. Holloway clucked, her motherly instincts in full force. Of course she can stay the night. We've got that small room off the kitchen that's not being used. Mr. Pearson looked concerned. We should send word to the sheriff tomorrow. There might be relatives looking for her. Frank nodded, though something in him rebelled at the thought of handing Zara over to strangers. I'll ride into town in the morning. That night, after ensuring Zara was settled comfortably in the small bedroom with extra blankets and a nightgown borrowed from Mrs. Holloway's niece, Frank lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling of the bunkhouse. The other cowboys snored around him, but sleep eluded him as he thought of the girl's frightened eyes and brave little voice. Morning came with a fresh dusting of snow. Frank rose early, intent on checking on Zara before riding to town. He found her in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Holloway knead bread dough, looking marginally less frail in the light of day. "Morning, Miss Zara," he greeted, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway with gratitude. "Sleep well," Zara nodded, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "Mrs. Holloway says I can help with breakfast." "And a fine helper she is," the cook confirmed, patting Zara's shoulder affectionately. "Got a good pair of hands on her," Frank smiled. "I'm heading into town to speak with Sheriff Bennett, see if we can find out if you have any family nearby." The light in Zara's eyes dimmed. "I don't. Ma always said it was just us." Frank exchanged glances with Mrs. Holloway. "Well, we still need to let the authorities know. It's the law." After breakfast, Frank rode the 5 miles to Pine Creek, the small town that served as the nearest hub of civilization to Double Creek Ranch. Sheriff Bennett, a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, listened gravely to Frank's account. "Poor little thing," he said, stroking his gray mustache. "I'll make inquiries, but if she says she has no family, she's probably right. Times are hard. Orphanage and Helena might take her, but they're overcrowded as it is. What if no one claims her?" Frank asked, surprising himself with how much the answer mattered to him. Sheriff Bennett shrugged. "County doesn't have resources for orphans. Most likely she'd be placed as a servant with a family willing to take her in. Give her room and board in exchange for work." Frank's jaw tightened. He'd seen how such arrangements often turned out children treated little better than slaves, working from dawn to dusk with minimal education or care. "I see," he said stiffly. "And if someone were willing to take responsibility for her, someone who's not family?" The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. "You offering Garrison, that's a big responsibility for a young cowhand." Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Just asking. For now." By the time Frank returned to Double Creek, the short winter day was already fading. He found Zara sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a quilt and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling beside her. Zara nodded. "Ma and I never had a view like this in town. Our room only looked at the back of the mercantile." "Where was home before?" Frank asked gently. "Lots of places. We moved around. Ma took work where she could find it, washing, sewing, cooking." She looked down at her hands. "She was teaching me to sew, said I could be a seamstress someday." Frank nodded, imagining the hardscrabble existence the girl and her mother must have led. "The sheriff's asking around about any family you might have." Zara's shoulders slumped. "Am I going to an orphanage?" "Not if I can help it," Frank replied, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "For now, you're staying right here. Mr. Pearson says you can help Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen and maybe learn some ranch ways too." The girl's amber eyes lit up. "Really, I can stay." "For as long as needed," Frank confirmed, feeling a weight lift from his chest at her obvious relief. "Come on now, it's getting cold. Let's see what Mrs. Holloway has cooking for supper." As the days passed, Zara became a fixture at Double Creek. Mrs. Holloway took her under wing, teaching her to cook and bake. The ranch hands adopted her as a collective little sister, bringing her small treasures: a pretty rock, a hawk feather, an arrowhead found while riding the range. Even Mr. Pearson, stern taskmaster that he was, softened around the child, allowing her to help feed the chickens and collect eggs each morning. But it was Frank who became Zara's particular champion. When his duties allowed, he taught her to ride on an elderly, gentle mare named Buttercup. He whittled small animals for her from pine wood in the evenings, and brought her books from town when he made supply runs. Sheriff Bennett sent word 2 weeks after Zara's arrival that no relatives had come forward, and the orphanage in Helena was indeed full to bursting. For the time being, Zara could remain at Double Creek, provided Mr. Pearson was willing to assume temporary guardianship. Winter gave way to spring, and Zara blossomed like the wildflowers that carpeted the Montana meadows. Her hollow cheeks filled out, and her once dull hair gleamed with health. She proved to have a natural affinity for animals, from the kitchen cat to the most ornery cow in the herd. One evening in early May, Frank found Zara sitting on the corral fence, watching as he worked with a young colt. 8 years had passed in the blink of an eye. The gangly girl had grown into a lovely young woman of 18, with a quiet confidence and a gentle smile that made his heart beat a little faster whenever it was directed his way. "He's coming along nicely," Zara commented as Frank led the colt through its paces. "Better tempered than that bay filly you broke last summer," Frank grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "That filly had the devil in her. This one's just spirited." He finished the training session and secured the colt in its stall before joining Zara at the fence. "Mrs. Holloway says you've been baking all afternoon," Zara nodded. "Mr. Pearson's birthday is tomorrow. I'm making his favorite apple pie." "He'll appreciate that," Frank said. At 33, he'd matured from a young cowhand to the ranch's head wrangler, respected by the other men and trusted implicitly by Mr. Pearson. His feelings for Zara, however, had become increasingly complicated as she'd grown older. "Frank," Zara began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "I'm 18 now. Maybe it's time I found work in town. Mrs. Holloway has taught me enough that I could cook for a hotel or restaurant." Frank felt as though he'd been kicked in the chest. "You want to leave Double Creek? Why, aren't you happy here?" Zara twisted her hands in her lap. "Of course I am. This place has been more of a home than I ever had, but I can't stay forever. I'm not a child anymore and I need to make my own way." "Who says you can't make your way here?" Frank argued, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "Mr. Pearson values your work. Mrs. Holloway says you're the daughter she never had." "And what am I to you, Frank?" Zara asked quietly, her amber eyes searching his face. The question hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken feelings and possibilities. Frank had asked himself the same thing countless times over the past year or two. She'd been a child in his care, a little sister to protect, a friend to teach and guide. But somewhere along the way, his feelings had transformed into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified him. "You're important to me," he said finally, cursing his inadequate words. "More important than I know how to say." Zara's face fell slightly. "I see." She slid down from the fence. "I should go help Mrs. Holloway with supper." Frank watched her walk away, frustration roiling within him. He was a grown man, for heaven's sake, not some tongue-tied schoolboy. Yet when it came to expressing his feelings for Zara, words failed him completely. That night, after a subdued supper where Zara barely met his eyes, Frank sat on the bunkhouse steps, staring at the star-strewn sky. The other hands were inside playing cards, their good-natured arguing and laughter floating through the open window. "Penny for your thoughts," came Mrs. Holloway's voice as she approached, carrying a lantern Frank sighed. "Evening, Mrs. Holloway, just getting some air." The cook settled her ample frame beside him on the step. Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain young lady looking like she'd lost her best friend at supper, would it?" Frank looked at her sharply. "Zara said something? Didn't have to. That girl wears her heart on her sleeve, especially when it comes to you." Frank felt his cheeks warm. "I don't know what you mean," Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Oh, for a smart man, you can be remarkably dense, Frank Garrison. That girl has been sweet on you since she was 16, though she'd die before admitting it. And you've been mooning over her almost as long, though you try to hide it." "She was a child," Frank protested. was being the operative word. She's a woman now and a fine one, smart, hardworking, kind. Mrs. Holloway fixed him with a stern look. And she thinks you still see her as that little girl you found by Cottonwood Creek. Frank rubbed his face with his hands. It's not that simple. I've known her since she was 10. I taught her to ride, for heaven's sake. And now she's 18, old enough to know her own mind and heart. Mrs. Holloway stood with a grunt. She's talking about leaving, you know, going to work in town. She mentioned it, Frank admitted, his stomach nodding at the thought. And you're just going to let her go, after all these years? Mrs. Holloway shook her head. I thought you were braver than that, Frank Garrison. With those parting words, the cook made her way back to the main house, leaving Frank to contemplate the stars and his own conflicted heart. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Mr. Pearson's birthday celebration was a subdued affair, a special breakfast, gifts from the hands, and promises of the apple pie to come after supper. Frank had drawn the task of riding the north pasture to check on a herd of pregnant heifers, a job that would keep him away most of the day. As he rode out, he spotted Zara hanging laundry, her dark hair caught up in a simple bun, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face. She looked up as he passed, raising a hand in greeting. Frank returned the gesture, wishing he could find the words to express what was in his heart. The day stretched long, with several heifers requiring attention and a fence section needing repair after a fallen tree damaged it. By the time Frank returned to the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant orange and gold. The celebration for Mr. Pearson was in full swing, with the hands gathered in the main house for pie and coffee. Music played from someone's harmonica, and laughter rang out as stories were shared. Frank searched the room for Zara, finally spotting her on the porch, a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. He slipped outside, his heart pounding. Didn't want to join the party, he asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. Zara smiled slightly. Just needed some air. They get a bit rowdy when Tom brings out his moonshine. Frank chuckled. That they do. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about leaving. Zara's fingers tightened on the railing. And I don't want you to go, Frank said simply. I can't imagine Double Creek without you, can't imagine my life without you in it. Zara turned to face him, her expression guarded. What exactly are you saying, Frank? Frank took a deep breath. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, that little girl I found in the cold grew into a woman I admire more than anyone I've ever known. I'm saying that the thought of you leaving tears me up inside. I'm saying, I love you, Zara Kinnell, not like a brother or a friend. Like a man loves a woman he wants to build a life with. Zara's eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. Do you mean that? Frank stepped closer, taking her hands in his. With all my heart. I've been fighting it, telling myself it wasn't right because of how young you were when we met. But you're not that child anymore. You're a strong, beautiful woman who knows her own mind. Tears welled in Zara's eyes. I've loved you for so long, I can't remember when it started, but I thought you'd never see me as anything but that orphan girl you saved. Frank reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. I see you, Zara, I see all of you, and if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly, with Mr. Pearson's blessing, of course. Zara laughed, a sound of pure joy. I think Mrs. Holloway might have something to say about that, too. I'm not afraid of Mrs. Holloway, Frank declared, though his twinkling eyes belied his serious tone. You should be, Zara teased. She's very protective. Frank smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in months. As she should be, you're worth protecting. The courtship of Frank Garrison and Zara Kinnell became the talk of Double Creek Ranch and the surrounding area. Mr. Pearson gave his blessing with gruff affection, and Mrs. Holloway took it upon herself to chaperone their outings with a mixture of strictness and knowing smiles. They rode together across the spring green pastures, picnicked by the creek where he had found her, and attended the occasional dance in Pine Creek, where Frank proudly introduced Zara as his sweetheart. On a golden evening in September, Frank took Zara to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. A blanket was spread beneath a stand of aspens, their leaves beginning to turn to gold, and a picnic basket sat ready. "It's beautiful up here," Zara said, turning in a circle to take in the panoramic view. "You can see for miles." Frank watched her, drinking in her joy. The past 4 months had been the happiest of his life, each day a new discovery of the woman Zara had become. "I come up here sometimes to think," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the blanket. "It helps me put things in perspective." They shared the meal. Mrs. Holloway had packed fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and talked of ranch matters, of the coming winter, of plans and dreams. As the sun began to set, Frank grew quieter, more contemplative. "Is something wrong?" Zara asked, noticing his change in mood. Frank shook his head, reaching for her hand. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right for the first time in my life." He took a deep breath. "Zara, when I found you that winter day, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. You were just a child in need, and I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Zara said softly. "You saved me, Frank, not just from the cold, but from a life of servitude or worse." "Perhaps," Frank acknowledged. "But you saved me too in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Before you came, I was just drifting, doing my job, taking each day as it came. You gave me purpose. You made Double Creek more than just a place I work, you made it home." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been saving for years, not knowing what for. Now I know." He opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Zara breathed, her eyes wide. Frank took her hand. "Zara Kinnell, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Frank Garrison, I will marry you." Frank slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "It fits," he said, somewhat wonderingly. "Of course it does," Zara replied, examining the pearl gleaming in the last light of day. "It was meant to be." Frank pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise in his heart. As they broke apart, breathless, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "Look," Zara said, pointing upward. "The evening star, make a wish," Frank suggested, his arms still around her waist. Zara shook her head, smiling up at him. "I don't need to. I already have everything I could wish for." They were married on a crisp October day, with all of Double Creek in attendance. Mrs. Holloway cried throughout the ceremony, and even Mr. Pearson was seen to wipe his eyes surreptitiously as Zara, radiant in a cream-colored dress she had made herself, promised to love and honor Frank for all her days. The couple moved into a small cabin on the edge of ranch property, a wedding gift from Mr. Pearson, who declared that his head wrangler deserved a home of his own. Frank continued his work with the horses, while Zara divided her time between their home and helping Mrs. Holloway, who had begun to feel the weight of her years. Winter came again, and on a snowy December night, Frank sat before the fire in their cabin. Zara nestled against him as they watched the flames dance. "You know what day it is?" he asked, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair. Zara thought for a moment. "December 12th. 8 years ago today, I found a little girl huddled under a cottonwood tree," Frank said softly. "I wrapped her in my coat, never imagining she would wrap herself around my heart." Zara turned in his arms, her eyes shining with love. That cold, frightened girl could never have dreamed of the life she would find. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, where the slightest curve was just becoming visible, or the family she would create. Frank's eyes widened. "Zara, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Mrs. Holloway confirmed it. By summer there will be 3 of us." Joy surged through Frank like a physical force. He gathered Zara close, overwhelmed by the miracle of the new life they had created together. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you." As the snow fell softly outside their window, Frank Garrison held his world in his arms, the orphan girl who had become his heart's companion, and the child who would be their future. From the coldest day of his life had come its greatest warmth, a love that would sustain them through all the seasons to come.